Be careful what you wish for. If only someone told Izuku this sooner. Maybe he could have been lucky enough to be born quirkless. Yet he knows, through each painful death, that things could have been worse. So much worse. Midoriya Izuku Quirk, returned by death. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. After watching this video, don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Everything happened so fast, Izuku barely had time to register it. As soon as they hit the ground, Kacchan was already on the offensive. His attention honed in on All Might, and with a feint and a surprise attack, it almost looked like he could make it. He didn't. Before either boy could blink, All Might had already countered the attack, and Kacchan was back on the ground. Izuku had no doubt who would be next, when All Might ominously and deliberately turned his powerful body in his direction. "Are you going to fight?" He smiled, but there was no kindness behind it. "Or will you abandon your friend and run?" It was tempting, so fucking tempting to just bolt and leave Kacchan with this mess he was so keen to get himself into. And it wasn't like all those other times. He could run, and Kacchan would be fine. Perhaps a few bruises, some broken bones at most, but he would be fine. Because All Might was no real villain, as much as he tried to play the part. Because Izuku had seen what real villains do, and it's a kind of evil no one who didn't truly mean it could emulate. But in the end, the instincts which had been so painfully beaten into him with each additional reset he had to endure won out. He could run, but if the only way Izuku could win this was by leaving someone behind, he didn't want to. Don't misunderstand, it wasn't that he felt some kind of obligation toward Kacchan to stay. Rather, with the loud-mouthed blonde by his side or not, Izuku had already made his decision, because he knew that sooner or later, he would have to face a foe stronger than a weakened All Might playing pretend bad guy. And unlike his teacher, they weren't going to hold back. And they sure as hell wouldn't show any mercy. So he stayed. Even if it meant he would fail the exam, he stayed. For there were worse things out there than a bad grade and his idol's disappointment. As if, he bit out scornfully, the power of one for all lighting up the dusty battlefield with hues of bright green. Charging All Might head-on was out of the question. Kacchan tried, and despite his rather, admittedly, clever tactic, All Might had countered it with minimal effort. If Izuku wanted to win, he needed to be smart. Smarter than Kacchan, and smarter than All Might. For the moment, he dashed backwards, just as Kacchan flew over his head with a series of explosions launching him forward, like a malfunctioning rocket ship. And this, despite Kacchan's best intentions, left Izuku with the opportunity too perfect. He'd be damned if he missed it. Not unexpected, All Might made quick work of the explosive user's frontal assault. The blonde had attempted another feint, before thrusting a hand downwards and with a boom, launched himself into the air in an attempt to catch the pretend villain in the back. It reminded Izuku of their first battle trial, when Izuku had played the hero and Kacchan the villain, except this time, it wasn't as successful. Because All Might was the #1 hero, not just some Deku. All Might ducked the explosion that flew overhead, singing a few of his golden blonde strands, before grabbing a hold of the attacking teen's wrist and flung him to the side like dirty laundry. When his attention turned back to Izuku, the boy was nowhere to be found. "Did the little hero run after all?" he questioned out loud, scratching his chin. "That doesn't seem right." His head snapped to the right, smashing the huge slab of concrete coming his way just in time before it could cause any damage. "Smart, but you're going to have to try better than that, my boy." All Might didn't have time to finish his sentence, because before the hero villain even opened his lips, Izuku was already putting his next move into action. Too distracted by the flying piece of cement, All Might didn't realize that by the time the projectile had been launched, Izuku had already left his position long ago. "Behind you," he thought, fighting the nagging urge to say it out loud. Announcing your sneak attacks was something that only happened in movies, for no one would be so idiotic as to ruin the surprise of catching their opponent off guard just so they could look cool. Not daring to hold back, he drove his fist into All Might's right side as hard as he could without breaking his bones in the process. For a brief moment, he'd considered aiming for his weak spot, but that move was only useful because Izuku knew about it beforehand. Fighting a real villain, it was doubtful he'd have that kind of information. "There's no point if I can't use it in a real fight." All Might dashed off to safety, mitigating the worst of the damage. "I'll give you that one." He coughed lightly, wiping the corner of his mouth. But the same move won't work twice. You're going to have to come up with something new if you want to get me a second time. Easier said than done. The only reason this move even worked in the first place was because Kacchan inadvertently gave him the opportunity. But if he could use Kacchan's recklessness to his advantage once, then maybe. Out of my way, Deku! Izuku had less than a second to dive out of harm's way, before Kacchan tore past him in a trail of flickering lights. He squinted his forest green eyes as the brightness burned his retinas, and he almost missed the way Kacchan dodged All Might's grabbing hands narrowly, by firing off a blast to his left and letting the momentum carry him to safety. His feet hit the ground, and a black boot kicked up a cloud of sand and dust into his opponent's face. He didn't waste any time retrieving his leg from the air, but instead moved his hands behind him and set both of them off at the same time. His other foot came up to join the first, and he delivered an explosivated drop kick to All Might's face. The fake villain moved to grab his ankles, but Kacchan swung his arms from behind his back to aim them downwards, and still balancing atop All Might's face, set off 2 big blasts in his direction, stunning the symbol of peace temporarily. Kacchan smiled victoriously and jumped off his teacher, ready to set off his quirk once again aimed from behind. His victory was short-lived, however, because quick as lightning, All Might spun on his heel and landed a devastating blow straight into his abdomen. The explosive teen hacked up the contents of his stomach, and before he could recover, All Might sent a burst of wind his way, carrying the teen until he smacked shoulders first into a half-crumbled building. That's not gonna work. All Might grinned, and before Izuku had time to react, the flat of his teacher's palm cut through the air in a backwards moving arc, sending waves of wind pressure along the way, continuing until it met with Izuku and sent him off. You two sure like trying to attack me from behind, don't you? How unheroic. And you sure don't waste any time either. I almost didn't catch you in time, Midoriya my boy. Shit, Izuku cursed. He had tried to use Kacchan's assault to his advantage to sneak in an attack on All Might whilst he was distracted. But after so many hits and attempted hits from behind, the hero was on high alert. I need him to lower his guard again, he realized. Or else, I'm never gonna get another chance. Izuku wheezed as all air left his lungs at once, because suddenly, Kacchan was on him. He'd driven his form into the other boy's side, and he shouted, I told you to piss off, Deku! Is he for real? Izuku thought in disbelief. That whole conversation, and he still haven't learned anything? Izuku wasn't just going to let the blonde punch him around as he pleased. The back of his hand slapped hard across Kacchan's cheek, and in anger, returned. Why don't you piss off? So far, all I'm seeing you doing is letting All Might smack you around like you're his personal punching bag. Which, okay, that might have been too far. It wasn't even true, not really, and Izuku had taken his share of blows as well. He was just so angry, he couldn't stop himself from returning every Spitfire word thrown in his face right back. So, he hit him right where he knew it would hurt. This is what it must feel like to be Kacchan. He didn't like it. But it was also liberating, in a cruel and selfish sort of way. But it was a satisfaction that only lasted temporarily, and as addicting as it was, he knew he would come to regret it later. You're fighting the wrong opponent! All Might didn't give them any further warning, before another push of air blasted them away. This sucks, Izuku thought as he awaited his painful descent. It's not fair at all. But since when had Izuku's life ever been fair? When the 2 students crashed into the rocky rubble of the ruined city, Izuku knew what he had to do. It pissed him off, but if he wanted to win this, there was no other way. And for once, just once, he really wanted to win. Without an iota of doubt about his victory, he wanted to win. Before either of them could fully recover, Izuku's hand was already clutching Kacchan tight in his grip. He ran, not to flee, but he needed some time to think. He stopped, panting hard, hiding behind a building that balanced on its foundation precariously. He dropped the struggling blonde by his feet, and breathing heavily said, Kacchan, please, for once, can we just work together? Kacchan glared, but it wasn't quite his usual burning stare. Something seemed different about it, hesitant almost. Izuku continued, You won't ever have to talk to me again after this. But don't you want to win? Don't you want to win against All Might? He grinned big and wide. Not just something small, but absolute, obliterating victory? His fist clenched tight, and his eyes was filled with white-hot determination. I don't care what you have me do. Just tell me, and I'll fucking do it. I want to win. Christ, Deku. Kacchan looked at him like he didn't know who he was. I knew something was going on with you, But seriously, what the fuck? Since when did you want to obliterate All Might? Since I decided that if I'm able to do that, then I might stand a chance. If possible, Kacchan looked even more confused. A chance? A chance against what? What the hell are you planning? Izuku looked thoughtful for a second. Then, to survive. This is fucking crazy, Kacchan muttered, but the sharp grin on his face was telling. This is fucking crazy. So, you're actually going along with it? Izuku knew the question ran the risk of pissing the other teen off, but he never expected Kacchan to look so excited. The fucking expression on his face is going to be priceless, he said, and Izuku wasn't sure if it was an answer to the question, or the blonde just thinking aloud and ignoring him completely. Kacchan nodded his messy hair of spikes silently, as if already imagining it. Which, knowing him, he probably was. Just don't fuck this up, because I sure as hell ain't gonna carry you out of there. So long we get All Might, it's fine, Izuku assured. Then you can just run for the exit. Kacchan looked at him, as if offended. Always the same self-sacrificing asshole, he sneered, and Izuku realized his mistake. Quickly, before he had the time to work himself into a rage, Izuku corrected himself. Meeting the crimson gaze glaring daggers into him, he answered in a tone with unwavering resolve laced around every letter. I'm not gonna fail, Kacchan, that's what I fucking thought, he answered with a nod. Now come on, let's fucking destroy him. All Might scratched his chin, eyes scanning the concrete rubbles and crumbling buildings that made up the destroyed landscape around him. Now where could those two be hiding? One ear perking up, he gyrated his broad body to greet approaching footsteps. Midoriya, my boy, he welcomed, before tilting his head to the side and cupping his chin thoughtfully. Now let's see, where is that angry friend of yours? Not here, Izuku replied, not missing a beat. His lips were pressed tight together in a thin line of displeasure, and he eyed his teacher cautiously. You know, pairing the two of us together was really cruel, All Might. His name was uttered like a dirty word, and All Might forced a strained chuckle, eyes flickering nervously from the boy in front of him to the many jagged piles of debris scattering the destroyed battlegrounds. Not my idea, young man. But you know, a professional hero must have the ability to adapt to any situation, even unsavory teammates. Oh, so I'm the one that needs to adapt? Izuku walked with leisurely steps toward the not-villain, gravel crunching under his heel with every meticulous step. He paused by a wrinkled guard railing, which despite all the abuse it had endured, was still valiantly fighting to stand in the cracked concrete ground, as everything else fell apart around it. Izuku ran his gloved fingers over it carefully, feeling it shift precariously beneath them. That's funny. I'm not the one who attacked his ally when things didn't go my way. But I did fight back. Was that wrong of me? Am I not allowed to defend myself? Should I have just let him keep punching me until he was satisfied? Izuku smiled sardonically, hand closing around the metal bar resting between his fingers. All Might coughed into his fist awkwardly. Now, that's not what he started, before cutting himself off when he realized he didn't know how to proceed. What I mean is, what I'm trying to say. The hero's teeth clamped painfully over the tip of his tongue in surprise when a deafeningly loud explosion rang out behind him. Instantly, his head whipped backwards hard enough to give him whiplash, but Izuku forced the attention back on him with a loud shout and a gust of wind. Don't turn your back on me, All Might! It was just in time that his teacher managed to concentrate his focus back on his student, and his reflexes forced his arms up to shield him from the worst of the damage, while his heels dug deeply into the ground to dampen the effect of the windy assault. Izuku's teeth bit down on the inside of his cheek, and he flinched in pain as his finger turned a mottled purple, skin and muscles swelling unevenly around the broken bone. KHH. He held back the urge to curse, focusing instead on his next course of action. He couldn't waste any time. He needed to move, now. Another explosion, and Izuku ripped out the barely standing railing, which was still being held tight in his grip, before charging his opponent with soulful determination. Despite himself, All Might's attention had been stolen away from Izuku a second time that day, and his blue gaze was searching for a loud-mouthed blonde he was sure to find hiding somewhere between the jagged edges of ruined houses. Izuku grinned, almost manic from all the adrenaline pumping through his veins. With uncontained excitement, he whispered, I warned you, All Might, before wrapping steel bars around the muscular arms and torso of his hero, creating a makeshift prison, and caging the symbol of peace inside. But just as easily as Izuku folded the fence to his will, as easily would it be for All Might to break free. Despite that, The short amount of time Izuku would buy from All Might attempting to break away from his grasp was their only hope. Every tiny little second counted. It just had to be enough, because that was all he needed. A second, just a second, once he let go. But for now, he needed a few more. So, he holds on. With all the strength he could muster, he squeezes the person in his arms as hard as he possibly could. With his legs, his arms, his whole body, he holds on to the golden hero for dear life. Just a little longer. He could feel his bones creaking and muscles stretch, far enough that he swore he could the tiny fibers in them tearing as All Might continued to struggle. Just a little longer. A final blast of fire and smoke, and finally it's falling. Kacchan had done it. Izuku watched in awe and fear, eyes wide and mouth agape as the giant skyscraper broke in two. Almost as if in slow motion, it began to fall, and Izuku found himself frozen by the sight. It was pure destruction, glass and stone alike breaking apart and soaring through the air in a hail of debris, with the giant shadow of the remaining building just beneath, blocking out the sun and highlighting the carnage. Izuku couldn't hold on any longer. It was time to let go. His fingers unclasped from skin-tight spandex, limbs relaxing and crying with pain and relief all at once as he dropped to the ground. As soon as he felt the first contact of his heavy boots touching the floor, he dug his heels in and let his legs fall into a squat, before springing like a coil. His dark green curls lashed against his cheeks as he thrusted backwards, and in morbid amazement, he watched as pieces of heavy concrete, both tiny and small, crashed like meteors in a shower of rubble. When they hit the ground, it kicked up both dust and shrapnel, which surrounded All Might and hid the hero in a sandy cloak. Izuku had to squint hard as tears sprung into the corners of his eyes, doing their best to ease the burning irritation caused by the polluted air. It worked, he realized, the thought moving sluggishly in a dense pool of disbelief. But when it finally reached him, the awe and incredulously washed away to uncover a hiccuping laugh that made his chest feel like it was filled with soda, bubbling with amazement. Because finally, there was a chance. The mad plan he and Kacchan had struggled together with actually worked. They might actually beat All Might. As soon as his body hit the ground, he ran. With all the strength his legs could carry, he ran, never once daring to look back. He didn't know if the shattered building had pulled the hero down with it, trapping him beneath the rubble. He didn't know if All Might had already managed to dig himself free. A pit in his stomach, like vacuum inhaling everything around it, made him hollow with the worry that maybe this was too far. Were they making a mistake? It was a concern he didn't want to feed, because this was All Might. Of course he'll be fine. Was he really so conceited as to think he could seriously harm the number one hero? And more than that, it was the nervous flutter in his limbs that licked his flesh in warm, pleasant tickles that didn't want to consider how dangerous this plan might actually be. Because it was the only thing he could think of. It was the only thing that might give them a chance. In the corner of his eyes, he saw a flash of blonde as Kacchan joined him by his side. A crazy grin cracked across his face, and he cackled in delight. Holy shit, he swore, eyes meeting Izuku's. Did you see that shit? It was a rhetorical question, of course, so Izuku settled to answer it with a wide smile of his own. For one moment, whatever past they might have didn't matter, as they shared in each other's success, laughing in victorious glee. The laughter stopped as Kacchan suddenly pulled to a stop, and whipping his head back, he cursed. Fuck! Izuku joined him in halted movements, gaze joining the blondes and grimacing at the sight of All Might speeding toward them. His imposing form was covered in bleeding scrapes and bruises, his costume torn in several places, and just the tiniest hint of a limp left leg. His smile was strained, clashing sharply with the bright anticipation lighting up the vivid blue of his eyes. He was watching his students with acute focus, growing ever larger the more he closed in on them. Get behind me! Kacchan shouted brashly, bringing his hands up in front of him and squaring his stance. Izuku followed without a word, knowing better than to ask questions. I'm gonna give this fucker an explosion big enough that he won't have a choice but to dodge. He grinned, narrow pupils fixated on the rapidly approaching form of their opponent. When I tell you to, pull the pins of both of my gauntlets. You got that, you overly obsessed fanboy? Got it. Izuku acknowledged, brushing off the insult and maneuvered his arms under Kacchan's, preparing the grenade like gloves the same way he'd seen the other do so many times. His fingers curled around the metal loops, cold against his sweaty skin, and ready to pull at any moment. All Might's eyes increased in size, seemingly having caught on to their plan, but it was too late. Now! Kacchan screamed, and Izuku's senses quite literally exploded in a mix of heat, noise, and blinding light as both Kachan's hands went off at once, which joined the gauntlets in creating a massive blaze made out of pure glory and destruction, consuming all in its path. The power was enough to bring both students down with it, forcing their feet off of the ground and up into the air. But Izuku, having taught himself to never let a bad situation go to waste, seized the opportunity. The exit was at their backs, but even with the force of the explosion, it would not be enough to carry them to victory. So, he gritted his teeth, and while he could still feel his toes touching the ground, pushed off as hard as he could. With the power of One for All and the burning backlash of Kachan's quirk, they were sailing toward the exit at a dangerous speed. Wrapping his arms ever tighter around his partner's torso, all Izuku could do was pray, "Please let this be enough." Fuck! Kachan choked as Izuku's limbs dug into his torso, and he probably would have turned his head to glare at him if he could. "Give me a fucking warning next time before you pull some shit like that, would you?" "No time," Izuku dismissed, squinting through blonde strands. He'd lost feeling in the lower half of his feet, but it was easy to ignore with the adrenaline fueling his mind and body. "Can you see him? Did you get him?" "Of course I got him," Kachan replied with a huff, but his eyes surveyed the horizon intently for a telltale flash of golden blonde or electric blue. It was hard to see anything through the hair lashing across their faces and the black smoke still floating like a thick curtain over the fake city, but their senses were set on high alert for the first sign of trouble. Izuku looked behind him and saw the hard ground approaching rapidly. "Time to land," he warned, bracing his legs. After that, it was only a few more meters to the exit, and they would be home free. Assuming he didn't break his legs before then, that is. His soles slammed into the unforgiving asphalt, sending shocks of pain rocking throughout his bones. The smell of burnt rubber entered his nose as his feet skid along the ground, and he locked his teeth together in a pained grimace as he fought against gravity's best attempts to topple them over like pink domino pieces. "What the fuck?" Kachan hissed, and Izuku yelped as the back of his heel caught in an uneven crevasse in the ground. Their bodies tilted backwards, just barely missing the large piece of rubble flying over their heads. The air was forcefully stolen from Izuku's lungs as his back hit the ground, and Kachan crashing on top of him. The blonde quickly rolled off, cursing loudly all the while. "Jesus Christ, that fucker just doesn't give up, does he?" he blared, throwing a heated glare toward the rock that just missed them by a few centimeters. Then, he turned it towards the dark cloud it escaped from. A dark chuckle reverberated through the broken streets, and black dust as the towering silhouette of All Might could just be hinted at through the smoke, before it cut off to a muffled cough. Izuku stared intently into the darkness, opening his mouth. "He can't have much more in him," he said, his eyes a wild green and gleaming with the words he kept repeating in his head. "Can't give up, gotta win, Then why the fuck are we still standing here?" Kachan snarled, pulling him to his feet. "We're almost there. If we lose now, I swear I'm gonna kill you," Izuku snorted, casting his eyes to Kachan's sour expression. "Yeah, that might work." They ran. His feet felt numb, yet every step shot sparks of pain through his legs. He was sure to get an earful from Recovery Girl later. He glimpsed behind him, and was met with the cold blue eyes of All Might bearing down on them. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed Kachan by the black of his tank top, and feeling the electric rush of One for All pour through his arm, he threw. Kachan made a strangled noise of surprise as he gravitated into the air, only a few more steps from the exit. All Might reached his arm out, large looming hand rapidly closing in on his green-haired student. "Oh no, you fucking don't!" Izuku could hear Kachan shout in front of him, as he twisted his body mid-air. "Duck!" He did. The stench of burning hair invaded his nostrils, and beads of sweat broke out across his scalp like salty raindrops. Scorchingly hot air filled the space above him, and he blinked his eyes, attempting to soothe the burning dryness. Then, he righted his back and continued to run, and he could feel the hovering presence of All Might disappearing behind him, his mind blank of everything but reaching the exit with Kachan. He can do it. He can. Both he and Kachan will make it out of here. No retries, no resets. No one left behind. A bloodied and blistered hand reached out to him. His brain had shut down long ago, and his body was running on autopilot. The edges of his vision were dotted with black, and all he could see was that hand. He'd forgotten who it belonged to, but it didn't matter. He took it. Kachan pulled, and they both lost their balance and tumbled on top of each other. The blonde sputtered in indignation, but Izuku was too damn exhausted to do anything about it. His throat burned as he breathed, and he was inhaling so much air he thought his lungs might burst, with limbs like jelly. Kacchan pushed him off harshly and let him roll onto his back. "Get off, you twerp!" he complained, but he was too winded to put any real bite behind it. Instead, he opted to join Izuku in the frantic attempts to catch his breath, which formed an almost companionable silence, aside from the heavy breathing that tainted it. The sound of gravel scraping against each other entered their ears, and All Might was looking down at them. A giant smile lit up his face, a complete dissonance with the rest of his marred and battered appearance. "Congratulations!" he boomed, smile stretching impossibly wider. Bright crimson reflected of his teeth and dripped slowly down the corner of his mouth, but he didn't even seem to notice. "You both pass." Izuku looked like a fish gaping for air, mouth open in disbelief. He knew what it meant once he crossed that finish line, but he never thought he would actually make it. Kacchan's expression was neutral like stone, but his clenching fists betrayed the emotion he couldn't hide, spilling out of them like the tiny lines of crimson dripping from his palms to the tip of his fingers. "You really surprised me with that falling building." All Might smiled, before his face suddenly took on a more serious tone. "That being said, while your tactic might have worked on the basis of this being a simple exam, I'm sure you know as well as I that this could never be used in a real-life scenario. For that, not to mention your recklessness, I have to give you a few demerits." Kacchan sked. "Still, as you did follow the rules of the exam, you both pass." The hero's smile pulled taut over his cheeks, pearly whites gleaming like diamonds in the sun. His dark pit surveyed his two students, and with a bright expression of relief and pride, he proclaimed, "Wonderful teamwork, you two!" As predicted, after Izuku and Kacchan had been forcibly whisked away to the nurse's office, Recovery Girl dished out a biting lecture about understanding your own limits, and that recklessness will only get you killed. It was interesting to see someone else on the receiving end of her ire for once, Izuku thought, and the fuming blonde looked like he was about ready to implode. Kacchan's hands were wrapped in layers of bandages, and swimming in a hefty amount of salves to ease the pain and speed up the healing process. Izuku's feet and legs found themselves in the same predicament, and he momentarily considered never moving again. Every little twitch of his torn muscles felt like someone firing a flamethrower aimed specifically at his nerve endings. "Maybe I can find a job as a living statue," he thought, wincing. Not long after Recovery Girl finished her treatment, Aizawa walked through the door together with a sheepish All Might at his heels. Izuku raised an eyebrow at them, which Aizawa met with a dead-eyed stare. Kacchan was wearing his usual expression of displeasure, and with a scowl at the teachers, he barked out and annoyed. "What?" Aizawa's eyes landed on searing red, and for a moment, he was just silent. Then, with a deep, frustrated sigh, he spoke. "I watched the footage of your match." He eyed them coolly. "Your behavior was unacceptable." Now Aizawa, they did." All Might began, but cut himself off when he received a tired glare in response. "Don't try to make excuses, All Might. They need to hear this, and you know it as well as I do." All Might peered at his students, looking guilty, but ultimately sighed and nodded his head in acquiescence. "No, you're right. Please excuse me. I got too caught up in the moment," Aizawa hummed, and his attention returned to the two teens frowning up at him from their hospital beds. The teacher's dark eyes zeroed in on Kacchan, finding their first target as he shot off his lecture. Izuku observed silently, watching as crimson eyes began to twitch in frustration. "But Kugu, you attacked your teammate unprovoked. And no, finding him annoying doesn't count as a provocation," he snapped, before Kacchan could open his mouth. "I shouldn't have to tell you why this sort of behavior is unacceptable, especially for someone studying to be a hero, but you've proven me wrong." Kacchan lowered his head, but continued to glare hotly at his teacher. Aizawa continued, "You're supposed to be fighting villains, not each other. What if your little spat caused you to fail? What if the villain escaped? What if your inability to control your own emotions caused someone's death?" With each word his eyes burrowed deeper into Kacchan's. "In a real battle, even the tiniest distraction could be the difference between life and death. You don't become a hero because you want to fight. You become a hero because you want to save lives." As the last words left Aizawa's mouth, Kacchan's face strained of emotion, and he started blankly at his teacher's back as he turned to Izuku. The green-haired boy met the disapproving stare with eyes tired enough to challenge the infamous insomniac. "What did I do wrong this time?" he drawled out, and Aizawa narrowed his dark eyes on him. "Don't test me. While I understand defending yourself, know your boundaries. When you put your foot on Bakugo after you already knocked him down, was that in self-defense? Izuku raised a corner of his mouth into a weary smile and answered, Yes. Do you think he would have just given up after I kicked him into the pavement? He glanced to the boy in question, expecting a hail of red daggers thrown his way. But Kacchan still had that same unreadable expression on his face, and Izuku frowned. He looked back at his teacher. Aizawa did not look amused. Is that so? He spoke slowly. And in that moment, was that what you were thinking? Were you attempting to de-escalate the situation? Izuku shrugged. Kacchan is hard to de-escalate. He's like a hand grenade. Once the pin is pulled, it's too late to stop the explosion. He eyed his teacher consideringly. I gave him some advice. Advice? Aizawa repeated, raising an eyebrow inquisitively. And what sort of advice did you give him? Izuku looked at Kacchan again. Then, I told him that if he continues the way he does now, it's not gonna end well for him. He turned back to Aizawa. Or do you disagree, Aizawa-sensei? Aizawa didn't answer. Deku-kun! Midoriya-kun! He was still in the nurse's office when his friends ran up to him, worried looks on their faces. Uraraka threw a suspicious glare Kacchan's way, but he ignored her. She turned her attention back to Izuku. Conspiratorially, she leaned close and spoke in a hushed voice. What happened? Did he do something? Did he hurt you? She cracked her knuckles menacingly. If he did, just tell us, and we'll take care of the rest. Ida waved his hands, looking aghast. We won't be using violence. That's unbecoming of future heroes. He whisper-shouted, not addressing to the fact that a large chunk of a hero's career consisted of violence. Still, they understood his intention and didn't comment on it. Of course, I'm not saying that we'll let him get away with it. We just have to go through the proper channels, like professionals. Izuku didn't quite understand why, but a soft giggle burst through his lips, and he moved his hand up to cover it. His friends watched him, their serious expressions brightening at the sight of his eyes crinkling in amusement. Not wanting to lie, says the liar. To his friends, Izuku answered truthfully. Well, he did. Immediately, his classmates' faces turned sour, looking like they just stuffed a lemon in their cheeks. But before they could storm over to Kacchan and give him an earful, Izuku cut in. But it's alright. It doesn't bother me anymore. Uraraka looked at him, the start of angry tears pricking the corners of her eyes, and she clenched her fists. That doesn't make it alright. You don't have to force yourself to forgive someone just because you think that's what a hero does. Because it's not. Izuku's eyes hardened, but quickly softened when he saw her concerned expression. He sighed. That's not what I'm doing. He smiled at them, a genuine, though bittersweet, smile. Really, I'm fine. Actually, I'm glad what happened did. I feel. His gaze turned to Kacchan. He had his back turned to them, laying in the hospital bed, head to the wall. Izuku rested his eyes on him a moment, before turning away. I feel like something important happened today, he settled. It was a rough start, but in the end, we managed to work together. We defeated All Might. It was fun. Uraraka and Ida met each other's stares, curious and concerned all at once, then looked at Kacchan. They shook their heads, and then they were gushing about how their own exams went. Mina, Kirishima, Kaminari and Siro burst in just seconds later, fighting to be the first through the door and loudly talking over each other as they crowded around Kacchan, who barked at them to piss off. Izuku listened intently as Ida described his match against Power Loader, his wild gesticulating painting a very vivid image. Kacchan continued to be bombarded with questions, and despite all his complaining, he answered most of them, though somewhat dismissive. Eventually, Recovery Girl came in and told them to keep it down, and to not bother still recovering patients. Izuku's chest felt light. His muscles still ached painfully, but it was like fuzzy background noise now. For a moment, Izuku felt at peace. Dr. Kyusai smiled at him as he sat down. How have you been doing since we last met? She asked, hands folded over her blue little notebook. Izuku mulled over the question for a while, considering his answer. Finally, it's been good. Kyusai jotted something down. Did something special happen? She wondered, eyes raising to meet his. We had the end-of-term exam at UA. Izuku provided, and his therapist looked intrigued. It must have been pretty stressful, but judging from your response, you seem to have done well. She tilted her head slightly and tapped her pencil to her cheek. I'm curious. What does the end-of-term exam of the most prestigious hero school in Japan entail? Well, first there's the written exam. He began. It's pretty much what you'd expect. Lots of questions about quirk laws and the history of heroics, along with some more general subjects. Then there's the practical exam. He smiled at the memory. We were paired in individual teams to fight against one of our teachers, pretending to be a villain. That sounds pretty extreme. The doctor commented. I heard every teacher at UA is a pro hero. Did they at least take it easy on you? Well, I wouldn't say they went easy on us. The boy scratched the back of his skull. But they did provide us with alternative means to complete the exam, without having to beat them in a straight-up fight. Who was your opponent? All Might. Dr. Kusai looked impressed. And you won? Izuku nodded. It wasn't easy, of course. Actually, I didn't think it was possible. Especially not when. He cut himself off suddenly. But the woman's keen eyes did not miss a beat, and her pupils narrowed. Was there a problem? She prompted, notebook up and ready. Izuku avoided her gaze, staring into a corner of the room. Dust had gathered between the crack where the wall strips met, and he studied it like a modern piece of art. Finally, still considering the small spots of dirt that stained the white varnish, he said simply, My teammate. Dr. Kusai frowned. This person you don't get along well? Izuku shook his head mutely, green curls softly whipping his cheeks. Then, tilting his chin up, he stared through the window, watching green trees swaying calmly back and forth in the wind. We did. The doctor put her book in her lap, concentrating on him. What changed? It's complicated, he answered vaguely. We used to be friends. But then, when everybody started to get their quirks except for me, I guess I wasn't important anymore. I just became a boring, useless Deku. You've known them for a long time then. How did they feel about you entering UA? Izuku snorted. I'm lucky his quirk isn't killing people just by looking at them. The woman's eyebrows furrowed, and she grimaced mildly. Not good then. A soft laugh escaped the boy's chest, and Dr. Kusai looked startled, before a pleased smile soothed her face. She retrieved her notebook and moved her pencil over the paper, while she continued her questioning. How was it, working together with him against All Might? He punched me. His therapist paused, eyes leaving her page to meet orbs of green. So I kicked his head into the pavement. She lowered her hands. Now I'm even more curious to know how you managed to pass the exam. Izuku leaned back in his seat, eyes fixed to the ceiling, staring at nothing. I guess I managed to talk some sense into him. Whatever I said, it was enough to convince Kachan to work with me. At least temporarily. He smiled placidly, and his eyes met Kusai's. I'm not sure if anything between us has changed, but... He clenched his hands over one another, and his head lowered subconsciously. I want to believe that it has. He wasn't sure when the tears started, or even why, until the doctor offered him a white tissue box with a sympathetic look on her face. He took it gratefully, quickly scrubbing the wet saline off of his cheeks. Kusai laid her blue block on the table, and extended a slim hand toward him, a mellow expression on her face. Do you mind if I use my quirk on you? She asked. Usually, we have patients fill out blankets asking them how they're feeling, but I feel that this is much more accurate. Izuku inhaled a final sniffle and nodded, putting the tissues down on the table. Okay, he murmured, letting his hand fall in hers. Like the first time they met, she closed her eyes and let her quirk to its work. She didn't pull away hastily from him with a terrorized look in her eyes this time, but instead held him with a considering expression and eyebrows furrowed lightly in concentration. Eventually, she lets him go, and slowly opens her eyes. I'm glad you're feeling better, she says, and pick up her notebook. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.